So this is my roundhouse analysis video, and first is the summary. So the novel starts out with Joe, who's a young boy living a carefree life on his native reservation. But he finds his life and his family dynamic upended after the rape of his mother, Geraldine, at the roundhouse. In an attempt to obtain justice for his mother, he seeks to find the perpetrator, but soon discovers the muddled legal territory between Native Americans and the U.S. government. Although Geraldine remains lifeless for a long period of time after the attack, she learns that her fleeing the roundhouse did not result in the death of a child, which alleviates her guilt, and she begins to aid law enforcement. The perpetrator is revealed to be Lyndon Lark, and though he is arrested, he is soon released because of the complexity of the law. In the end, though, Joe resolves to kill Lark with the help of his best friend Cappy, so that his family may rest assured that they are safe. So the first literary device is symbolism, and on page 59, Erdrich writes that, "But when I reached the roundhouse, the sun fell like a warm hand on my shoulders," and on page 90, Joe remarks that he took great gulps of sunshine, and on page 160, I think Geraldine was recounting her experience at the roundhouse, and she said that the baby put her hands up into the light, falling through the chinks in the pole logs. Essentially, Native American tribes have a history of including the sun in stories, as it created life and sustained people through crops. The sun, particularly light, symbolizes the presence of God, or a guiding power that provides a sense of relief. Each time the sun or its rays were mentioned, Joe was in the roundhouse, which accentuates its holy nature. This was employed to reveal that, though he was not especially religious, Joe had a spiritual guide that remained with him throughout the story, demonstrating that he was never alone or forgotten in his journey, though he may have thought so because his parents didn't pay him much regard. The second literary device is metaphor, and on page 89, Joe remarks that his mother's eyes were black pits, and on page 152, he says that his father tried to keep a conversation going every night. He forged on, a lone paddler on an endless lake of silence. So Joe's characterization of his mother and father reveals that they have undergone immense change due to the rape. Geraldine is depicted as a soulless being who has lost a defining human characteristic, her eyes. This is intended to show the underlying vulnerability in women and highlight the transformative power of violence. Furthermore, the characterization of the father provides a sense that he is relentless in his attempt to achieve a sense of normalcy, that he no longer has a partner in life. So rather than having the wife that he typically has, who he can rely on, he's lost his wife to grief. This exemplifies that, although his efforts appear futile amidst the bigger picture, he is not giving up on saving Geraldine and finding a renewed sense of direction in life. The next literary device is paradox, and on page 187, Joe discusses the story that he overheard Mushum telling in his sleep, and he says, "She said many things, taught Nanapush, so that as he lived on, Nanapush was to become wise in his idiocy." And Erdrich employed paradox to underscore the ironic notion that wisdom is not the quintessential concept that most people think of. Instead, wisdom is found where most would not typically think to find it. This relates to Joe's foolish actions throughout the novel, particularly when he opted to murder Lark, because, although he acted irresponsibly, his family found justice in Lark's death and Joe was able to walk away without punishment. Joe remained ignorant because he was still but a child, yet he gained much wisdom through the events after the rape and his many interactions with adults, because everyone treated him as an adult because this event did age him. The next literary device is simile, and on page 143, Joe says, "As I looked at my father and jerk at our kitchen table, my brain was still stuffed with money like the head of that trash doll with manufactured mischief in her eyes." This simile reveals that Joe's life was altered by the discovery of the money, as he could not merely forget about it and move on with his life. In comparing himself to the doll, Joe reveals that he is much more troubled than he appears, and foreshadows the trouble that Joe will find himself in regard to Lark. He compares the manufactured mischief of the doll to his own actions, a simple byproduct of the rape of his mother. This draws attention to Joe's battered temperament and spirit, since he is no longer the innocent, perfectly pristine boy that he once was. Next is my text-to-text analysis, and it is in comparison with Othello. So, similar to the rape of Geraldine, Othello's murder of Desdemona exemplifies the violence against women that is inherent in society. Othello and Iago continue to suppress and infringe upon the rights of women, whether it be mentally manipulating them to fulfill their desires, such as Iago and Emilia, or physically harming them, such as Othello and Desdemona whenever he slapped her. Othello also highlights the racial divide in society, as Othello was perceived to be inferior due to his skin color, and natives were looked down upon for their race, evident in the women's attitude at the hospital after Geraldine had been raped, and Joe was just watching on, and he saw their behavior. And moreover, Sonia was practically exiled to the reservation due to her diminished social status, which reveals that many deem natives to be inferior. This highlights that, even at a time when equality is perceived to be at an all-time high, there still exists a racial disparity. Next analysis is text to world, and the issues that are evident in this novel are undoubtedly relevant in our society. Native Americans remain a marginalized population that do not receive suitable treatment by the government and continue to be looked down upon, although less so than other times in history. For example, Native voices were stifled in the recent Dakota Access Pipeline protests, as the government placed their own priorities above respecting the sovereignty of Native American tribes. Moreover, sexual violence is something that is prevalent at college campuses across the country, which is something that many of us will have to deal with in just a few months. In recent news, there have been many high-profile rape and sexual assault cases, such as the Baylor rape scandal and the Stanford rape case, which highlights the idea that rape is a common occurrence in society, although many times it goes unreported. Next is the setting, and the Roundhouse took place in North Dakota on the Ojibwe Reservation, which is actually the fourth largest Native American tribe in the U.S., the Ojibwe. And there you can find long and bitterly cold winters because, of course, it's North Dakota. And the Ojibwe Reservation was possibly based off of the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, and the economy there largely revolved around the government, which ties in to Geraldine's role because she worked in like the tribal enrollments thing or the tribal enrollments office, and Basil worked as a judge, so they both had really close ties to government. And in general, the setting played a pivotal role in the storyline, as legal boundaries were so complex that Geraldine was unable to obtain justice through the legal system. Native government is a separate, sovereign entity, although it is still interconnected with the U.S. government, as well as the North Dakotan government. Next are my favorite quotes, and on page 116, I think Linda said this: "When you are little, you do not know that you are screaming or crying. Your feelings and the sounds that comes out of you." I totally cannot type, but your feelings and the sounds that come out of you is all one thing. I remember that I opened my mouth, that is all, and that I did not shut it until I was back with my mom. So this quote was really powerful when I read it, because I feel like this is such a personal feeling, and you can't really write it if you've never experienced this before. And this is just so insightful because I've never heard anyone discuss emotion this way, and it really just characterized Linda's feelings like impeccably. It's just full of such heavy diction, although it is a bit simplistic. I have no clue. It's just a really cool sentence in general, and it's incredibly powerful. The next quote is on page 143, and Joe said, "I've read that certain memories put down in agitation at a vulnerable age do not extinguish with time, but engrave deeper as they return and return." Although this was kind of in the middle of the book, and I didn't really get it as I was reading it, as I was looking back through the book and looking for parts that I especially liked, I found this, and I find that it connects with the end, and whenever Joe killed Lyndon Lark, because personally I think that situation and his actions really just ate up at him, and I think that he was talking about this because he tried to forget what he did, but he just couldn't. And I just think that is super powerful, just like the other one, but just like the fact that it's so true. Yeah, I just really like it a lot. And on page 229, I think Basil, he's talking about his law cases, and he says, "We are trying to build a solid base here for our sovereignty. Once again, I cannot type. I'm going to say we attempt to press against the boundaries of what we are allowed, walk a step past the edge." And I find that this really summarizes the struggle of the Native American people in obtaining just the right to do whatever they want. And I really like the whole, like, they're pressing the boundaries. So they're constantly, like, making history and just being really innovative. And yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but this is really cool. On page 195, the pastor guy, totally forgot his name, but the pastor said, "You can be bit by temptation anytime. It is a thought, a direction, a noise in your brain, a hunch, an intuition that leads you to darker places than you've ever imagined." And I think that this kind of foreshadows and plants the notion into Joe's mind that he can kill Lyndon Lark, because he had this temptation. He just wanted to find safety for his family and do whatever he could to protect his mother, and that just happened to be committing a sin and killing someone, taking someone's life. And I think that this is what the temptation that the priest was referring to, and it kind of foreshadowed Joe's actions and hinted that Joe would be tempted by something really bad coming up. Okay. Next are unique discoveries. So although we did look up a bit earlier on, I looked up a bit for this project and found that 84% of natives have experienced violence, and in particular 56% have experienced sexual violence, which I find particularly alarming because that's way greater than the national average. And 90% have experienced violence from a non-tribal member, which is insane because, like, this is exactly what happened in the book. And just the fact that Erdrich, like, really elaborated on this issue is great. And I see why she chose Lyndon Lark as the perpetrator. And it is also a cultural stigma to report rape. Also, along the lines of the author, so Erdrich is a member of a Native American tribe, part of the Ojibwe actually, which is really interesting. And she also grew up in North Dakota, where the book took place. And this heritage influenced her writing and provides personal insight into life on a reservation. And in her books, she places a particular emphasis on Native American culture, which is clearly evident in the Roundhouse because that is essentially what the Roundhouse is about. And for my lit crit, so the first scene was around page 205-ish, and Grandma Ignatia was explicitly discussing her sexual activities with Mushum. And from a feminist perspective, this scene challenges the existing notions that the reader holds about sexual promiscuity and women, which creates a sense of discomfort because she is a woman. Because she is a woman, she is expected to remain secretive and complacent rather than outwardly boast about her sexual life. Ignatia's happiness is not solely derived from men, as she fulfills her own desires and takes control into her own hands. Furthermore, the fact that she is tolerant of men's affairs but not of women's shows that women continue to be held to a double standard. And from an archetypal perspective, Ignatia and Mushum display the archetypal wisdom that arises from age and experience in life. This conversation displays the conflict between young and old, as the two reminisce about the adventures of their youth, but are grateful of the lessons that life has taught them and the many memories that they hold because of this. My next scene is when Joe describes Sonia's pillow as smelling like the erotic decay, like the inside of a wilted flower, and places particular emphasis on her physical appearance. So from a feminist perspective, this scene depicts the inequality that exists in the perception of women, as Sonia is determined solely by her outward looks. The comparison to a flower, reminiscent of Georgia O'Keeffe's art, reveals feminine qualities, or the lack thereof due to Sonia's troubled past. Sonia's sexual history is regarded as demeaning because society demands chastity.